The airport was loud, restless, and unforgiving, but for Daniel Carter, the world went silent the moment the boarding agent shook her head and stepped back as if he didn't belong there. He stood frozen at the gate, one hand gripping a worn backpack, the other holding his 5-year-old daughter's sleepy weight against his chest, when he realized this wasn't just a delay, it was a rejection that felt painfully personal, like the world had decided he was no longer worthy of moving forward. Before the story unfolds, take a moment, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet miracles that change lives, to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Daniel had not always looked this tired or worn down. There was a time when his shoulders were straight and his eyes carried plans instead of fear. But life had slowly chipped away at him, starting the day his wife passed away from sudden illness, leaving him alone with a newborn and a future he wasn't prepared to face. Years later, the weight of responsibility had etched itself into every line of his face. He worked nights as a warehouse loader, days as a delivery driver, and still barely kept ahead of the bills. This flight was supposed to be their escape, a one-way ticket to Seattle where his late wife's sister had promised him a job and a small place to stay until he could stand again. It was hope folded into a boarding pass, and now it was slipping through his fingers. The problem wasn't paperwork or timing. It was money, appearance, and assumption. His credit card had declined when a last-minute fee appeared, and the murmurs around him grew louder as other passengers watched a man in second-hand clothes struggle to explain himself while holding a child whose shoes were taped at the soles. Daniel felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in his chest, the same feeling he had known at school meetings, job interviews, and hospital billing desks. He tried again, quietly, respectfully, but the answer didn't change. Rules were rules, and sympathy had limits. His daughter Lily stirred in his arms, her small fingers tightening around his jacket as if she sensed the danger of this moment. Daniel lowered his forehead to hers, breathing her in, reminding himself that falling apart was not an option. He stepped aside as instructed, watching other families pass through the gate with laughter and rolling suitcases, each step they took feeling like another door closing on his future. He wondered how he would explain to Lily that the dream he had promised her, new trees, new parks, a home without fear, might not happen after all. That was when the atmosphere shifted, subtle at first, like the hush before a storm breaks. A man who had been standing several feet away finally moved forward. His presence was calm but commanding, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of boardrooms and decisions that shape companies. This was Jonathan Reeves, a name known in business magazines and financial news, the CEO of a global logistics empire. He had noticed Daniel earlier, not because of how little he had, but because of how carefully he protected what mattered most in his arms. Jonathan had grown up with a single father himself, a man who worked himself into the ground and still apologized for not being enough. Watching Daniel now stirred something old and deeply personal inside him. He approached the gate quietly, leaned in, and said something so soft it didn't echo through the terminal, but it changed everything. With a single gesture and a few words spoken with certainty, he made it clear that Daniel and his daughter were not alone, that they were under his responsibility. What followed felt unreal to Daniel, like watching someone else's life unfold. The tension dissolved. The declined fee disappeared. The boarding passes were reissued, upgraded seats included, and apologies replaced suspicion. Daniel barely understood what was happening, his hands trembling as he accepted the new tickets. He looked down at Lily, who smiled sleepily, unaware that her future had just pivoted in a moment she would never remember but would forever benefit from. As they walked down the jet bridge, Daniel felt something unfamiliar swell in his chest. It wasn't just relief, it was dignity returning. Jonathan walked beside them, not ahead, not behind, but equal in stride, asking gentle questions about Lily's favorite colors and Daniel's plans in Seattle. For the first time in years, Daniel spoke about his hopes without bracing himself for disappointment. He talked about working hard, about wanting Lily to grow up believing the world could still be kind, even after loss. During the flight, Daniel stared out the window as the plane lifted into the clouds, tears finally escaping after being held back for so long. He wasn't crying because someone rich had helped him. He was crying because someone had seen him, truly seen him, and decided he was worth standing beside. Across the aisle, Jonathan read quietly, occasionally glancing over with a small smile, as if to reassure Daniel that this wasn't charity, it was humanity. When they landed, Jonathan didn't disappear into a private car as Daniel expected. Instead, he handed Daniel a card, not with promises of money, but opportunity. A referral, a connection, a chance to work in Seattle at one of his partner companies, with hours that allowed fathers to be present and wages that allowed breathing room. Daniel held that card like it was fragile glass, Knowing it represented more than a job, it represented trust. Weeks later, in a small apartment overlooking a park where Lily laughed freely, Daniel would often think back to that moment at the gate. He would remember how close he had been to giving up, and how one person's quiet intervention rewrote his story. He worked hard, earned promotions, and built a stable life not fueled by bitterness, but gratitude. He taught Lily that strength was asking for help when needed and offering it when possible. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in unexpected places, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and leave a comment to show your support. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And before this story ends, tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where a stranger changed someone's life in a single act of kindness? Because somewhere, in an airport, a hospital, or a quiet corner of the world, another Daniel may be standing at the edge of despair, waiting for someone to see him and say, without hesitation, that he belongs. The weeks after that flight passed quietly on the surface, but inside Daniel Carter, everything was changing. Seattle greeted him with cold mornings and unfamiliar streets, yet each step felt lighter than the last. The small apartment his sister-in-law helped him secure was modest, but to Daniel it felt like a sanctuary. Sunlight poured through the thin curtains each morning, landing on Lily's face as she slept, and for the first time since his wife's death, Daniel woke up without the immediate fear of losing everything before the day even began. The job Jonathan Reeves had quietly opened the door to was demanding but fair. Daniel started at the bottom, loading shipments and organizing schedules, but the environment was different from anything he had known. Supervisors listened. Effort was noticed. When Daniel stayed late, it wasn't because he was disposable, but because he was trusted. Every evening, no matter how tired he felt, he rushed home to Lily, who greeted him with drawings taped to the wall and stories about her day that felt more valuable than any paycheck. Still, the past didn't let go easily. Some nights, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the fear that this stability was temporary. He had lived too long on the edge of collapse to fully trust good fortune. He saved every extra dollar, skipped meals without realizing it, and apologized too often at work, as if expecting someone to suddenly remind him that he didn't belong. The scars of survival ran deep, even when life finally softened. One afternoon, months later, Daniel received an unexpected email requesting his presence at a company conference. The sender's name made his heart race. Jonathan Reeves was hosting a leadership summit and had personally invited Daniel to attend. Not as a favor, not as charity, but as recognition. Daniel reread the message again and again, hands shaking, wondering how a man who once couldn't board a plane was now being asked to sit in rooms where decisions shaped futures. At the conference, Daniel felt the familiar wave of self-doubt wash over him as he walked past polished floors and confident executives. But this time, he didn't turn back. He remembered Lily's smile at the airport, the way Jonathan had stood beside him without explanation or apology. He reminded himself that he had earned his place, step by step, shift by shift, sacrifice by sacrifice. Jonathan spotted him from across the room and greeted him not with praise, but with respect. He listened as Daniel spoke about improving workflow efficiency and supporting workers who were struggling silently, just as he once had. Jonathan saw something rare in Daniel: leadership rooted not in ego, but empathy. That conversation would later lead to a promotion, then another, and eventually a role where Daniel helped design programs for working parents, ensuring no one had to choose between feeding their family and being present for them. Years passed, and Lily grew taller, stronger, and more confident. She never remembered the humiliation at the airport, but she grew up surrounded by the outcome of that moment. A father who stood tall. A home filled with laughter instead of worry. A belief that the world, though harsh at times, still held room for grace. One evening, as Daniel tucked Lily into bed, she asked him why he always told her to be kind to strangers. Daniel paused, feeling the weight of memory pressed gently against his chest. He told her that sometimes, people carry invisible battles, and that one small act of kindness can change the direction of an entire life. Lily nodded sleepily, unaware that her father was describing the moment that saved them both. If this continuation of the story moved you, if you felt hope rise quietly in your chest, please like the video, share it, and let us know your thoughts. Your support truly matters and helps these stories reach hearts that need them. Before the final moment fades, comment below and tell us what kindness means to you, because your words might be the encouragement someone else is waiting for. And as the lights dim on this story, remember that sometimes the most powerful words are spoken softly, and sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person willing to stand beside another and say, without hesitation, "He's with me."